What is up, everybody? Solomon here. Hope you guys are all having a fantastic day. As you guys know, in collaboration with HashPack, we are nailing out tons and tons of Hedera ecosystem interviews. Super excited today to have Ken Anderson. Ken is the lead dev advocate he was the lead dev advocate with Hedera from 2018 to late 2021. He's the CEO of Launchbadge, which is a software engineering and management firm. How are you doing this morning, Ken?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic.
Awesome. So, we usually try to, hop right into these. So I want to ask you a little bit if you could give a little bit of a background about yourself, maybe introduce yourself to the audience, like your kind of background in Web3, your relationship with Hedera, because maybe some people aren't aware, you're super old school within the Hedera ecosystem.
Yeah, well, my experience with Hedera goes back to pre-Hedera when it was still Swirls and Hashgraph. And it really comes down to Launchbadge. I started back in 2015 as a software development company. We did custom software. Our specialty was actually in telecom software. And so we had a number of clients. We had one in particular that was, you might be aware of, Mingo, who was actually building a messaging app. And then in 2017 decided, you know what, hey, we want to run an ICO and we want to add all these like blockchain features to our app. And so we were in research mode in that summer of 2017. And I think it was about September 2017, I came across an article that said Hashgraph, the blockchain killer. And so I remember reading that and I was like, okay, I got to figure out what's going on here. So I went to the Telegram for Hashgraph, and it was Lehman started out answering a bunch of questions. There were a handful of other people in there who were helpful in answering questions. But before I even asked a question, I went back and read like 3 months worth of Telegram just to make sure I wasn't going to ask a question that had been asked 100 times before. What ended up happening is I started to understand the protocol and started answering questions for new people. So I almost became like the de facto moderator to that Telegram channel because I was learning the product too. And what it came down to is, I got my hands on the Swirls SDK and realized like, holy cow, we've been trying to build this on Ethereum, on EOS, on anything that was out at the time. And nothing was meeting our needs from a messaging performance perspective, strictly from a performance and cost perspective alone. Nothing was meeting our need for that project. And so shout out to Mingo for being the catalyst for that. But yeah, it was one of those things where it was like the use case was driving my interest in the technology. And at one point, I think it was in November of that year, Mance was speaking. He's speaking in Bangkok at a conference. And I remember thinking, I need to get a license to this technology because it wasn't open source and there wasn't a public network. It was just the SDK with a proprietary license. And so I bought a plane ticket and flew out to Bangkok and got a ticket to the conference. And as Mance is coming off stage, I said, hey, can I get you a mango smoothie? And he said, sure. And so it was Jordan and Edgar and Mance. And I sat around the table, Jordan, Edgar, and Mance kind of being like the OGs of even Swirls. We sat down and they talked to me about a bunch of stuff. I brought up a whole bunch of community concerns like open sourcing, public network, whole bunch of stuff. And Mance kind of opened up to me at that time. And I remember getting some inside scoop and him also being like, let's not talk about this yet in the public, right? We got some preparation and legal due diligence to do. But it was a really eye-opening experience where I gained a ton of trust in not just the technology, but in the team. Like that was probably my first experience with the team. And Mance said, yeah, we'll give you a license. And so I said, great. I also have some other ideas I want to send you. So I went home. I actually wrote up a whole proposal about why we need to rewrite Hashgraph in Rust. Mance came back to me. I mean, again, I got to say, like the leadership on this team, Mance and Lehman, are some of the most, trustworthy, honest, straightforward people, right? They shoot straight. And so I remember Mance coming back to me going, this looks like a great idea, but just not right now. We've got a bunch of commitments we have to make. So we're just going to run with the tech stack we have, which I totally get. And so, but he came back a couple of weeks later and said, hey, do you want to come on as our chief developer advocate? Or actually, he said, chief developer evangelist. Actually, let me rephrase it. It wasn't even chief. It was developer evangelist is what it was. And I remember taking that offer and crossing out the word evangelist and putting the word advocate in there and saying, I'm not going to be an evangelist, but I'll be an advocate. I'll be the annoying guy inside the company who represents the will of the developers externally. And so that's kind of what happened there. I kind of put myself on hold, made myself a kind of a silent participant in Launchbadge, let my partner take over Launchbadge and continue to run with that while I went and put myself on loan basically for 3 years to Hedera to help build that community, kind of get everything started. Started the developer advocacy team, and in building that team, we built an incredible team with incredible talent. And I'll tell you, it's grown way beyond now what I could have done. So I'm really proud of what it's gotten to. As a matter of fact, since I've left, they've hired so many developer advocates, and they're handling so many cool things that I'm really excited about how it's kind of, even out of my hands, has grown to what it has. So that's my history with Hedera. And in 2021, early 2021, had some family medical issues I had to kind of take some time off for. And then at the end of that, I thought, you know what, we're kind of at the point where we've got a good executive team at Hedera. We've got a good DA team growing. I think I can do more good outside of Hedera. And so I put in my notice in September of 2021, and then went back to Launchbadge. And then for the last year and a half, I've just been back with Launchbadge, which is my company that helped me discover Hashgraph in the first place. That was the company I had started up and had discovered Hashgraph with. But yeah, it's just been a great experience. 3 years in that whole startup process is intense, but it was a lot of fun. And I think we're in an incredible place right now.
From the Launchbadge aspect, I mean, because I was looking through the site today, there's so many services and you guys have really accomplished so much already. Can you kind of just talk about what you offer for developers out there that may be interested in learning more about Hedera Hashgraph? What type of services you guys have facilitated so far? I mean, I could go down the entire list for what you guys have on the website, but it's extremely impressive. So can you kind of give an overview of those services, the software development kits you guys offer, and the onboarding process for people that are looking to potentially build on Hedera, but not necessarily knowing all of the ins and outs about the network?
Yep. Yeah. So I'll probably let's start with the developer side first. So we've always been very involved in open source technology as a company. It's part of our ethos. All of my developers are incredibly brilliant, and almost all of them we found through some GitHub project. As a matter of fact, that's part of our hiring process, is we review your GitHub repo. And so there's a strong affinity toward open source technology. So that's one of the ways that we find that we can stay current on and really have an influence on the Hedera ecosystem, is participating in the open source side. So for a while, we were working on the SDKs, specifically the JavaScript, the Go, and the Java SDKs. In full transparency, we were subsidized by Hedera for those at the time. Now we've kind of turned that over to Hedera, but I think actually LimeChain is now managing those SDKs, and we've picked up the Rust and the Swift SDKs. Honestly, because Rust is where our heart is. So for other reasons that are very technical, but so we continued with that. But we've also built my HashPack Wallet, which is the open source web-based wallet. We built Kabuto initially as an Explorer and mirror node alternative, mirror node API alternative to the existing API mirror node. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but that's kind of what we were doing. And as a matter of fact, we built Kabuto to be the developer tool stack for instrumentation and tooling for developers. That was kind of the long-term vision. The short-term vision was let's build some tools that are useful now, but in the long term, let's build an entire developer experience that is community driven, really focus on developer experience. And Hedera is going to have its own approach to things. And I think Hedera is a little more conservative in their approach. We can be a little more reckless because we're developers ourselves, and we break often and quickly, and then recover and keep going. And so we kind of like that. That's just our whole mentality is, let's use the latest technology, figure out where the gaps are, and either fill those gaps or shift technologies quickly.
Yeah.
But that's kind of our approach. So from a developer perspective, that's kind of how we're involved in that. We feel like Hedera is just a rich ecosystem to build. There's so much opportunity to build technology there. Now, from projects who are saying we want to build something, we don't know where to go first, we actually recently launched a discovery process that we do not just for Hedera projects, but for any startup project or any project that is trying to like overcome any plateaus or whatever in their growth. And so that discovery process, it's pretty straightforward. It's a $5,000 discovery process. It takes us 30 days to do. And what it ends up with is a approximately 30-page document that includes the business requirements, user requirements, and technical requirements. And in the Hedera space, and even in the telecom space, which you get in addition to that, is our expertise. So we get to kind of help enrich both the business requirements and the user and technical requirements. So that's a pretty straightforward offering that we have, but beyond system integrator. So we actually have a number of projects that have hired us or that are engaging us right now to build projects on Hedera.
That's awesome. You guys had, I was looking through your blog and through Launchbadge, and you had an interesting blog post from 2020, and I would be curious about your take on it now, based on really how much growth we have seen, whether it be from a decentralization standpoint, or you could even kind of look at, you know, the user experience on Hedera right now and how drastically that's even changed over the past year. And the blog post was entitled "Why Hedera?" and you had 5 bullet points on there. I'd be interested for you to maybe touch base on like how far you think Hedera and the ecosystems come from 2020 to today, and what you're looking forward to in the future within these 5 points. The first one was Launchbadge building out on Hedera because it's fast enough to be practical for multiple types of business processes. Yeah. How much of a kind of shift have you seen from 2020 to 2022? We can look at things like Atma.io and things that are really starting to go live using the number of services that exist on Hedera. So how much has changed since 2020, and how much would you expect to change in the next 2 years moving forward to like 2024, 2025 timeframe? Yeah,
well, I think Atma is probably a perfect example of what I was referencing in that particular point, right? So that particular point says, hey, there's certain types of processes that are ideal for Hedera. Anytime you need to have like public auditability or public attestation, first of all, you need the performance. Second of all, you need the provenance. So you need to have the witnesses, which is basically, you can think of the Hedera nodes as a multi-notary mechanism. So you can think of, you know, anytime you post a transaction, you're going to get a timestamp and you're going to get 28 signatures. I think we're at 28, right? 27, 28?
27, 28.
Yeah. So, but you're going to get multiple signatures on that timestamp. And I think that's, to me, it's like if you go to a legal notary and you go and say, hey, stamp this note for me, stamp this document for me, you're getting a single person putting a date and a signature and their notary stamp on it. And then they keep a copy of it in their own record. That's basically what we're doing times 27. Right. Yep. So to me, this is incredibly useful from a trust perspective. And that actually touches to one of the later points. But the fact that it can happen so quickly, I mean, we're talking 10,000 transactions a second with about 5 seconds of latency. When I say certain types of businesses or certain types of processes, I'm talking about processes that aren't sensitive to the 5-second latency. Most business use cases are okay operating within 10,000 TPS, but some business processes need to be faster than 5 milliseconds or 5 seconds of latency. And there are ways to mitigate that using running hashes and periodic attestations instead of real-time attestations, or batch attestations, if you want to think of it that way. So I think there are ways to mitigate that in most use cases. But I think Atma is a perfect example. I mean, we see between Atma and AdStacks and some of the other use cases that are going on, you know, it's really the only project that maintains the trust while being fast enough for the use case.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one I can stand behind, because I can look at Algorand. Algorand has about 5-second latency. Solana is about 2 to 3 seconds of latency. So when we're looking at latency and throughput, you can probably get similar performance from Solana and Algorand. But the reality is like you're sacrificing on the trust factor. And that's the difference, is we get to maintain trust and speed here, which is really hard to do in the public space.
Yeah, and I don't want to be, you know, I definitely don't want to be way too, you know, kind of general within Hedera. But one thing that I did want to kind of ask you is, you know, with more governing members of the network, it's obviously become more decentralized. You know, what are you looking forward to within the Hedera ecosystem this year for, you know, even, you know, increasing out that decentralization further? We've seen kind of on the roadmap the community validation aspects and things like that, which I think is going to be incredibly exciting to watch.
Yeah, I think I mean, there's a number of technical things that need to get solved before we can really scale up. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Swirlds Labs or Hedera and their goals, but the way I see it is like, sharding is one thing we got to get sorted. Because the way I see it, as soon as we start incorporating open community nodes, we have to have some mechanism for coordinating or orchestrating those nodes across the protocol. I mean, theoretically, you could have thousands of nodes on the main net on the single shard, and it would increase latency, but it's doable. I mean, we technically could do that now, and maybe increase the transactions per second. But then we increase latency too, and so there's always this balancing act between latency and that. Something I expect to see and we've already seen it once so far, but something I expect to see over the next year is that improvement in those latency numbers. I mean, we've already seen it come down a little bit. I know that there's some efforts of optimizing, hard drive storage access, which that'll be incredible, because then we can talk about much larger scales of being able to support more key value pairs and smart contracts and more account IDs and lots of cool stuff we can do once we can access the hard drive quickly. We got the new gossip protocol that just came out, that chatter protocol. So there's lots of cool things that are happening that are pointing towards improved optimization. I think we're going to see a lot of that. I'm excited for kind of like the trusted community nodes to start to participate. So if you remember, the phases were start with the council hosting nodes, then trusted community nodes, and then open it up to public nodes. So there's this process. I think before we get to that public nodes, though, I feel like it would be prudent to solve the sharding problem. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Lehman. He's probably a better person to ask on that. But yeah, those are the types of things I'm looking at from a node and community adoption perspective.